If you were watching the college football playoff recently, I think one thing became obvious, and that was this thing's not going to stay this way for very long. Now, that was a broadly held consensus opinion, I would say. What wasn't so understood was, number one, when the changes were going to happen, because they were never going to happen in 2025, so this coming year will be virtually untouched. And number two, the big misunderstanding or the state of confusion was, well, how is it going to change? And when will it change? And why will it change? Well, those mechanisms are becoming a lot more clear. Now, what I promised you, and I've promised you this about 10 times now, I've subtly promised you, you're not wasting your time when you're watching our show or you're listening to this show and we're talking about playoff expansion or conference realignment or format changes. Our guidance was always twofold. Go back and listen to any show we've talked about. The guidance was, number one, the Big Ten and the SEC run this. Now, you may say to yourself, oh, of course they're the biggest conferences. No, I'm telling you they run it. Exclusively they run it. More on that in a second. Number two, they've got to find a way, and they're going to find a way, to cement the value of their conference races. Because this past year was an abomination. This past year, you had head coaches like Lane Kiffin in the SEC just outright publicly saying, do I even want to play for my conference championship? You had people in the Big Ten saying, should Oregon have been better suited to lose their conference championship game? Okay, that is poison to anyone, i.e. a network, that's paying billions of dollars for those media rights. And you can't have that. The networks aren't happy, which means the leagues aren't happy and the university presidents aren't happy. The commissioners are on the hot seat. So they were going to change all this. And now, late this afternoon, good friend Ross Dellinger, I will again state, through no obligation of my own, because he doesn't work for the same company I do, he is doing the best job in the world at reporting on this and breaking news on this. YahooSports.com, last hour or so. Expansion to 14 or 16 teams is coming. You may think that would rub me the wrong way. At this point, I'm numb to it, and there may even be some positives given where we already are. You know, you're listening to Mr. Anti-Expansion here, but given where we already are, we may be making some positive strides here. So, Ross Dellinger, I encourage you to go read this very lengthy report yourself on YahooSports.com, but expansion to 14 or 16 teams seems imminent. The format will look radically different. Hello, hello, hint, hint. And this is not years away, people. This is weeks away from happening. Not meaning it's going to take place in 2025. This is a 2026 and beyond thing. So here's what's happened. I'm going to summarize all this for you, and I'm going to let you know sort of what's been going on behind the scenes. Like a lot of people have been talking. Okay, I've spoken to a number of people on this, but they never give you the go-ahead. Dellinger got the go-ahead. So what's been happening for a while is if you back up to last year, the SEC and the Big Ten essentially walked in the room and said, we don't like the way things are, and we are way bigger than you now. So if you don't let us have our way, or if you don't let us have more of our way, we're leaving. And we're starting our own playoff, and we're going to do our own thing. And for a second, people thought, oh, they may be bluffing. They weren't bluffing. They weren't bluffing. I can tell you that much. The Big Ten and the SEC were fully ready. In fact, they probably almost hoped that someone in there would call their bluff so they could have an excuse to go ahead and do what they've wanted to do for a long time, and you'll never convince me otherwise. But they got what they needed, okay? And what they needed was total control. So they grabbed control last year. They're about to exert it this year, but here's what no one knew. This was the elephant in the room that's been unspoken until this moment. I'm going to have Colin, in just a second, not yet, I'm going to have him throw up a screenshot of this story in just a second. But first, I want to read you another excerpt here, okay? This is from the report from Ross Dellinger. Within the SEC and Big Ten, momentum is building to further expand the playoff to 14 or 16 teams, assign multiple automatic qualifiers per league, as many as 4 for themselves, and finalize a scheduling arrangement together that may fetch millions in additional revenue from TV partners, okay? Now, that's the first part, and that's just telling you what the format's probably going to be. This mirrors what I told you was coming, but what I didn't tell you, but we can now talk about, is the graphic that Director Colin's about to throw up on the screen. Because this right here is one of the most jaw-on-the-ground statements that you will have seen on this show, but I kind of hinted around at it for a long time. Hey, quick time out. Check and see if you're subscribed to the channel. If you're not, make sure you do. It's free. It doesn't obligate you or sign you up for anything. It just helps us keep the channel free. All right, back to the show. And if you're listening on podcast, here it is. Understand what you're looking at right now. I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, according to most who have viewed the Memorandum of Understanding from last spring, the SEC and Big Ten hold sole discretion on the future college football playoff format starting in year 2026, the beginning of the CFP's new 6-year TV agreement with ESPN that runs through 2031 playoff. The agreement grants the league's decision-making powers over the format, but does direct them to have meaningful consultation and collect input from other conferences before making their decision. So, that is how you exert authority. You gather it 1 year, and then you just swing the hammer. Because unbeknownst to America, the SEC and the Big Ten had baked in a provision starting in 2026 where we'll control the format. You didn't know that yet, did you? You know it now. And now you know why they've been very, very almost arrogantly confident that this will work out to their advantage. They hold all the cards. That's why it was going to work out to their advantage. So the Big Ten and the SEC are probably going to double or triple their annual revenue per school from the college football playoff contract that they eventually come up with for 2026 and beyond. But see, if you're a fan and you're watching in Milwaukee, you don't care about that so much because you don't make that money. Maybe if you're a Wisconsin fan, you're happy, hey, my school's going to make more money. That doesn't affect you, though. Here's what affects you. What's the playoff going to look like? Well, I'll tell you, because I think we've 95% figured out what the new playoff's going to look like. Again, if you're just tuning in, this thing's not going to happen in 2025. No changes were ever coming in 2025. 2026 and beyond is when the Big Ten and the SEC hold all the cards, and 2026 and beyond, I think, is when you're going to see either 14 or 16 teams, and I think the SEC and the Big Ten in this new format are going to build a world where they have automatic qualifier spots for all of these conferences. Now, it sounds lame. It sounds stupid. I've thought it was stupid for a long time. However, given the point we're at, I actually think this format they're pitching around makes more sense than what we were doing. So here's what it's going to look like from a broad strokes perspective. Let's say it's a 14-team field. Instead of just having the committee rank the teams 1 through 25, and then you got your automatic qualifiers, and number 1 through 4 is reserved for a conference champ, just forget all that. Just wipe the slate clean, and what's going to happen is the SEC will have 4 guaranteed spots, and the Big Ten will have 4 guaranteed spots, and so on and so forth. Other conferences will have less guaranteed spots. The logic there is, of course, we're the Big Ten. We're the SEC. We're better than you. We know it in dodgeball terminology, and therefore we deserve more spots, and we control the format, so you're pretty much going to swallow whatever we feed you at this point. Here's what that does. What that does is it guarantees them spots, sure, but also what it does is that's it. At that point, there's no more committee drama. There's no more wondering what athletic directors from across the country gathered in Grapevine, Texas on a random Sunday are going to decide as it relates to how you stack up against the rest of the country. It's just all about your conference race. Now, I was never for playoff expansion, but we got it, so I had to bite the bullet on it. But given that we're here, I'm telling you, I think I'll end up liking this format more, because what it does is it redirects the focus back onto the conference championship races. The way that works in practical form is if I'm in the Big Ten or if I'm in the SEC and I know I got a guaranteed amount of spots at the table no matter what, I'm not worried about what my team's records are anymore. I'm just worried about who the 4 best in the conference are. And so then think about that. Think about the fact that, number one, because the SEC knows they're going to have 4 spots no matter what, they're going to expand to 9 conference games. That's a virtual certainty because of this format. Number 2, it's going to allow the Big Ten and the SEC to enter a separate scheduling agreement. I mean, this is spelled out in Dellinger's report, by the way. This has been rumored for a while, that they'll enter into another scheduling agreement where not only are both of them playing 9 conference games, but they're both entering into agreements where Ohio State plays Alabama more frequently, where Georgia plays Michigan, where LSU plays Penn State more frequently. Why? Because the record doesn't matter so much anymore, because you got a guaranteed amount of seats at the table no matter what, and they're really going to be decided based off conference record. In the aggregate, as it relates to out-of-conference games, you're just looking to beef up your inventory. And you got a TV partner over there in ESPN willing to pay millions upon millions in extra revenue above and beyond what you already make, which further distances the SEC and the Big Ten from the rest of college football, which yet again makes me circle around and wonder, why is the rest of the sport not seeking private equity solutions to go do their own thing? But I digress. That's not what we're here to talk about tonight. So what happens here is the same format. I think they're going to pursue the same format I pitched you 8 months ago, and then 4 months ago, and then weeks ago. And again, I'm going to tell you the way I think this will look is if you know you've got 4 spots at the table no matter what, then I'm looking at the SEC conference race, or I'm looking at the Big Ten conference race. And what I think they'll do, although there are a couple of scenarios here, but what I think they'll do to crystallize the value of winning the conference is I think they'll take 2 of their guaranteed spots, and I think they will give those seats to the number 1 and number 2 teams in conference standings at the end of the year. You heard me right. That means there is no league championship game. There's no conference championship game. Number 1 is in. That's your reward for winning the conference. Think of it the same way you do in college basketball. You got the regular season conference title. Now they go play a conference tournament. So just forget the conference tournament part. You win the regular season conference championship. Here's your crown. Also, you get 1 of our guaranteed seats. Number 2, you had a good season. We're not going to give you a crown, but because you were the runner-up, you're also going to get 1 of the guaranteed seats. At which point, the Big Ten and the SEC have 2 more guaranteed seats at the table. And so you may be out there thinking, Josh, did you just torpedo Conference Championship Saturday? No, I did not. I torpedoed the concept of a conference championship game. Instead, what I think you'll get is two play-in games, 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 from each conference. That's the way I'd structure it if I were them. And so what that does is it gives you not 1 but 2 games on what used to be called Conference Championship Saturday, and the winners of those games take up the other 2 spots of your 4 guaranteed spots in the playoff. So that's where I think they're headed with that. Again, that will move the SEC to play 9 league games. They've wanted to do it for a long time. It's just that they thought it was stupid to do it. If we were working off of this assumption that you are what your record says you are, if you go to a 9th league game, well, it guarantees you, how many teams are in the league? 16? It guarantees 8 more losses out of the 16 teams that play on that 9th Saturday. So this is where things are headed. I am very conflicted on this. There are 2 me's. There are 2 versions of me sitting here right now. Version 1 is the one that wishes we could go back in time and never have a college football playoff. Because I thought in my resistance to the playoff, as I probably have explained a million times by now, I wasn't against a 4-team playoff. I especially wouldn't have been against a 6 or an 8-team playoff, but I didn't ever think it was going there. I thought it was going to 12. And remember when we got to 12, one of the first things out of my mouth was, we're not stopping at 12. And a lot of people said, oh, come on now, they'll stop at 12. No, they won't. They were never going to stop at 12. And I don't know that they'll stop at 14 or 16 when they get there. But here's what I do know. Given that expansion had already happened, this format right here is a better format than what we just went through. Because what we just went through made no sense. This, if I can stomach an expanded playoff format, makes a lot of sense. Because at that point, you know how many seats a conference is going to have. And at that point, I'm just paying attention to the Big Ten league race. I'm paying attention to the ACC league race and the SEC league race, which is how I choose to watch college football anyway. I want to focus on Saturdays in the fall, and I want to focus on conference championship races, and this maximizes the value of those as best you can within the structure of an overall expanded playoff. So this is coming. Does this further distance the SEC and the Big Ten from everyone else? Absolutely it does. That was inevitable. I also look at that within the context of, the college football playoff contract. That contract that's exclusive with ESPN is going to run 2026 through 2031. You noticed the other day, now you start to see the tumblers fall into place, by the way. It's starting to make a lot more sense now. If you noticed the other day when the story came out, I think it was also Dellinger reporting this, about Florida State and Clemson sort of backing off their legal maneuverings against their conference. What they wanted is they wanted a tilted revenue dispersion that benefited them disproportionately, but they also wanted some language that reduced what it would take to get out of the league contract in what year? 2031. A lot of these league rights deals are up in what year? 2031. So it's a long way away, and I'm not hitting the fast forward button. I'm just telling you, go ahead and circle 2031, because that is the great pendulum shift in college athletics, not just football. But until then, I know it feels very, very wobbly right now, because it is. I don't remember an 18 or 24-month period in recent memory where college football was just still. Everything's changing. I cannot imagine trying to be a head coach right now. I cannot imagine trying to be a conference commissioner. I know those guys get demonized a lot, and for valid reason, for good reason. I think there's some other guilty parties out there that totally escape the blame, and I'm speaking of university presidents, a.k.a. the commissioner's bosses. It's very popular to say, oh, you know, Goodell's the commissioner, but he really answers to the GMs. Well, who in the world do you think commissioners answer to in college football? You think Greg Sankey just kind of shoots from the hip? Do you think Tony Petitti just kind of just wakes up Tuesday morning and decides what he wants to do for the day? Of course not. So everyone has strings attached to him, aside from us, apparently, because we're just free and easy here. So that's what's happening, guys. It's coming. It is coming, and better get ready for it. I can't wait for the feedback. I cannot wait for the feedback. This all, by the way, is in advance of meetings happening in New Orleans this week. I guess I should have mentioned that. The Big Ten and the SEC have big meetings coming up this week. They had them in Nashville a little while ago. Now they have them in New Orleans. What's with the Big Ten agreeing to come south? Is the Big Ten scared to meet in cold weather? Do they just want to play in cold weather? I don't know. Anyway, keep an eye on that. We will.